what an incredible gift it is to live in a world where we can make choices to eat fresh, delicious, cruelty-free food. Like, it's a choice that not a lot of people have, about what we eat. I guess the through line here is that tonight is a fundraiser for the Hunger Project. We had a beautiful video to show you, but not being that fancy with technology, I can't figure out how to plug it from the small screen to the big screen. So we will share the video of the Hunger Project on the Off-the-Mat Oz NZ Facebook page if you want to check that out. It's truly inspiring the work that this organisation is doing. The Hunger Project is a global partner of Off-the-Mat in the world because there's kind of this alignment around purpose and the way that these two organisations, Off-the-Mat and Hunger Project, choose to work. And that is to do with Seva, this concept that was brought up in the asana earlier. Seva yoga, similar to Karma yoga, is really about service, this idea of serving rather than helping, of collaborating with rather than depositing installments of prepackaged food in paddocks that has no nutrition, like a kind of World Vision model, or there are many other NGOs working in this way of depositing help, and then there's kind of this new wave of way of working that's more collaborative. So Seva is one of the key principles of the work of Off-the-Mat into the world, along with embodying your purpose. So this idea that when we get on the mat, we figure out, we pay attention to how we feel, we notice the movement of the mind, and the more that we train ourselves to pay attention to what's really going on, we can start to wake up to what's really going on in our own life, in our relationships, and out in the world. And so this idea of kind of embodying what you stand for, yoga gives us this very practical toolkit, as many of you know, to be able to support ourselves in the work that we do, and a ritualized spiritual practice where we can step on the mat and check in every day with our purpose. The third principle of Off-the-Mat into the world is conscious activism, also called spiritual activism. And so I've got a wonderful group of people sitting next to me tonight to start unpacking what that might look like. Tonight is not about answers, it's not about trying to define or box in, it's really an opening. And I'm so, I've been looking forward to this day for a really long time, and I'm so excited and simultaneously humbled to be sharing this space with all of you tonight. So thank you for all responding to our invitation. We sought you guys out because we know that the work you're doing is in this realm of mindful, conscious, aware, purpose-driven work. So the World Cafe is going to be a chance, in an hour or so, to really kind of dive deep with your voice and the way that you see the world. So our panel tonight, just quick, I'm sure you've all read their bios and got excited about them, but just quickly, next to me is Tara Donnelly, who's joining us from the Hunger Project. She's also a yoga practitioner. And then we have Ari Henry, who is the founder of Queer and Trans Yoga. He's a yoga teacher as well as a writer. And we have Sarah DeGraff, who is a yoga teacher and the founder of the Mind and Movement Center, a yoga studio based in Redfern that supports people living with mental illness. Katie Manitsas, the founder of Samadhi Yoga and Jivamukti Yoga Sydney. Katie's a writer and a doula and an activist and a long-term yoga teacher. And Emma Wasson, who is a community organizer with the Wilderness Society. She's an activist. Everyone on this panel is an activist and a yogi in their own way. Emma's really working with campaigning and protest, specifically environmental work with the Laird State Forest. So quickly, that's everyone, and you'll hear more from them in their own words. To kick off the panel, I'm going to start with you, Katie. I'd love you to kick us off with, what is conscious activism to you? What does that look like?
It's a huge question to start with. I guess in my tradition, I'm a Jivamukti yoga teacher, and although I've trained in lots of different types of yoga and sort of investigated lots of different ideas of what yoga is, for me that's what really resonates. My teachers, Sharon Gannon and David Life, were sort of pioneers in the movement of what they call and what I call spiritual activism, which actually is very closely linked to the work of Off the Mat. Sean Corn, who founded or was a co-founder of Yoga Off the Mat, actually was a student of Sharon and David's. She was a waitress at the Life Cafe around the same time that Sharon Gannon was a waitress at the Life Cafe when she met David Life of the Life Cafe. So, and then a sort of yoga, a whole like strand of yoga was born out of that. So the work of Yoga Off the Mat and Jivamukti Yoga is really, really closely connected. For me, I mean, there's so much I could say about it. It's such a broad subject, but the connection between yoga and activism shines through for me in the mantra Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, which I'm sure many of you know. And the translation that my teacher has given me for that mantra, it's often translated as may all beings be happy and free, which is kind of the direct transliteration from Sanskrit. But my teacher Sharon has sort of added to that, I guess, and she says may all beings be happy and free, and may the thoughts, the words and the actions of my own life contribute to that happiness and to that freedom for all. So it's kind of finding the connection between my actions out in the world through my thoughts and through my speech. And what's really interesting for me about the teachings of yoga is, as Westerners, we tend to think that what we do matters the most, and what we say is kind of somewhere in the middle, and what we think is the least important thing. Like, it's okay for me to have a negative thought about someone else if I don't say it or if I don't act on it. And even our judicial system, the legal system, is set up in that way. You know, like I might think about murdering my husband sometimes, but as long as I don't actually murder him, I'm okay. But yoga turns that on its head and says the thoughts are the most important thing, because from the thoughts come the words, and from the words come the actions. So if we work on our own mental states, if I work on compassionate, loving, kind thoughts, especially to those who I'm in most close relationships with, like my husband or my children, or, you know, your boss, or the people that are really like with you every day, then through those kind thoughts comes kind speech. It's like an automatic filter down, and through those acts of kind speech comes kind actions, and a desire to engage in the world in a way that is exactly as Kate was saying, of service. A way of giving, rather than what can I get from this situation, what can I give? So for me, the starting point of conscious action, conscious activism in yoga is my own mind, the chitta vritti, my own mental states. And that's a lifetime's project. And then from that, everything else kind of slowly starts to hopefully trickle down. And likewise, when it goes wrong, when I move into a place of negative mental states, or you know, whether that's anxiety and sort of depression, or actively feeling animosity towards others, even others whom I don't agree with their own actions, like people who are making wars, or, you know, creating industries like factory farms. Animosity and anger coming from me isn't ever going to serve or solve anything. So the practice begins with each one of us.
Does any one of you guys want to add to that? Your experience of what conscious, spiritual activism looks like?
I'm just going to say one thing. I just love the word because it has act in it. So it sort of says it all. It's about the actions that you choose to take, which of course are motivated by what's happening inside. But it has to have action in it, because we live in a world where there's a lot of other people, and just isolating ourselves isn't gonna, you know, bring us together. And the word yoga translates to mean union, so I take that to mean togetherness rather than separating things out.
Yeah, yeah. And Katie, you mentioned the chitta vrittis before, so the movements of the mind, and you know, that the movement of the mind can create imbalances in, you know, the way that we can go and act. And I know, like, yoga can provide support for people with their personal sustainability and how they manage that. So Sarah, just to kind of continue with you, like you're using yoga to support mental health. So how do you do that?
Well, I think yoga provides us this great opportunity to really look at what's going on for us. Like sometimes we don't have that opportunity until we get to a yoga class and we're on this piece of plastic and we're like, oh, there's a bit of silence, and then maybe we cultivate a more regular practice, and then maybe we get to a point where it becomes something that we perhaps do every day, but it doesn't have to just happen on your mat. Like you can have this kind of part of you that's like checking in and getting to know yourself at, you know, different points throughout your whole day. It's not easy. But I think that there's so many reasons in the world today to not do that. Like it's very easy to kind of, I don't know, push things away or something and separate yourself from things that maybe aren't exactly what you would want them to be. So when you have that opportunity to check in, I think that's my phone, how embarrassing. When you have that opportunity to check in, it allows you to cultivate a relationship to yourself. And I really think that that's often what's missing when these diagnosable symptoms present themselves. It's just that for whatever reason there isn't a space for you, the individual, to get in touch with yourself, and for that to actually be okay, like not uncool or not introspective or not like anything else. Like it's necessary.
Yeah.
Can I just get that?
Yeah, sure.
It's an alarm.
So I'm kind of thinking, like, what are some really practical tools that you take from yoga, whether asana, you know, pranayama, chanting, meditation, or even philosophy that can be used to support personal sustainability? And that's sort of for anyone.
Well, something that really resonated for me, which I've been thinking a lot about recently, was you mentioned it at the very beginning, you know, how lucky we are that we can eat cruelty-free, nourishing, good food. And I think for me, a practice that I do a lot at this particular stage of my life is a practice of gratitude. We're so incredibly spoiled in the way that we live our lives. You know, we're basically living in the top sort of 2 to 5% of the whole world's population in terms of the blessings that we all have in our lives. Every single one of us. You know, we have food and we have homes and we have family and we have people that care for us, and we have the opportunity to express ourselves creatively, and the list just goes on. And most people in the world don't have those things. And so sometimes if I'm struggling with something, I've got very young children, and that's a test of patience often for me. It's just remembering, you know, how fortunate I am. It's such a basic thing, but it's such a valuable practice. So to make that really practical, a meditation I really like to do, and I do a lot of, and it's sort of one that you can do just any time. Like you don't have to be sitting in a formal meditation situation. Like you can do it on the bus or in the line at the supermarket or whatever. It's just as you're breathing in, to bring to mind something you're grateful for, and as you're breathing out, silently, mentally, to say the words thank you. So it could be a person, it could be food, it could be you know, something you're grateful for in your life, like the opportunity to be of service in a particular way. And what I find when I do this practice is that things just keep coming. It's like it starts off and you kind of it's a very intellectual exercise, but when you drop into it a bit more and the intellect sort of disappears, it becomes very much an intuitive exercise, and it's really powerful. It's a really powerful, for me, a really powerful mood changer. So if I'm just feeling a bit kind of, usually for me it's impatient, then that can really shift the way I'm feeling.
Yeah, and interesting, you mentioned kind of parenting, that, you know, you're in these situations where there are circumstances that you can't control, and often being grateful and checking back in for the things that you can control or you can do, allows a sense of kind of peacefulness or gratefulness to rise. So I'm wondering for you, Emma, as an activist, like if you're kind of working, you spent a bit of time recently up in the Laird State Forest. There's been protests going on for a couple of years now, protesting an open cut coal mine. As an activist, when you're kind of sitting there and, you know, standing up for what you believe in and continuing to see like destruction and things that are like upsetting that you can't control, is there a place for yoga, or how that might sit with you?
Well, luckily, people up at the blockade camp are practicing yoga, which is nice. So there's people that have gone up and...
thanks to you?
I've been up there once and done that with a friend, but there's people that go up and share that with the people at camp that have been there for a very long time. So there has been space created for self-care and safety for people. So there's a little chill out teepee for people if they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed after a big action that day or something like that. There is a space there for them, and I think the community that has formed is really great in looking after each other's welfare. So yeah, the camp does provide for that. I suppose for me, myself, just yesterday actually, we did an action in the city, did an office occupation which was quite confronting, and I definitely kind of nerves and stuff were coming up for me. It was it was an interesting kind of situation, but I think, you know, we had a really good night's sleep the night before, and sort of was problem solving and dreaming in my sleep around, you know, what was going to happen, and and I think coming back to that principle of ahimsa in yogic philosophy is really just trying to remain peaceful in everything you do, and having that at the forefront of you know, the way you go about doing things. So practicing that, but also noticing that if we're looking at the yamas, so the first limb of the eight limbs of the yogic path, the yamas give us a bit of an indication on how we can relate to the world. Yeah. And so after ahimsa, there's satya, which is about truth. So there can be a bit of a dilemma in the sense of wanting to speak out and speak the truth about the particular ethics of a company and the destruction that they're causing, the forest and the community, the lives of people around them, the impact that their mining project is going to have on the landscape. But I think having done a little bit of reflection around that, I feel that that kind of dilemma I can reconcile by recognising that kind of the destruction that company is causing the environment and the community is not comparable at all to, the disruption that we're causing the company through protest is really nothing in comparison to the impacts of their actions. So I think like that kind of helps me feel okay about what I'm, the kind of protesting that we're doing, and trying to remain peaceful in that as well.
Yeah, a lot of the protests you are involved in are peaceful protests, and I think that's often the intention of activists to kind of, there's the peaceful protest chant, and police turn up and they want to fight, and there's this thing within us as humans, we do have a lizard brainstem that wants to battle when we feel afraid or intimidated, and thank God we have consciousness and we have the ability to reflect, and the neocortex allows us to go, okay, we can reflect on this and we can intercept ourselves. Like you said, you were in bed at night kind of thinking about what was happening the next day, coming back to your breath and all of that. Yeah. So I'll just jump to you now, Tara. You've just come back from Malawi, working with the Hunger Project. So like I was saying earlier, there's this alignment between the Hunger Project and Off the Mat around the idea of working together with communities. So can you just speak to what that looks like in the work that you've been doing and what sort of results that you've had?
Sure. So you talked a little bit about what we do as the Hunger Project, and the name can sometimes be a bit misleading. So we do talk about hunger, and our mission is to end hunger by 2030. But what comes behind hunger is really kind of what we're doing to get to that goal, and that is about people's mindsets, really, and so our work is really the basis of it is about shifting mindsets. So it kind of comes back to this, starting with your thoughts, because how we see it is that someone cannot create a different reality for themselves that looks different to what hunger looks like without first being able to see that in their mind and have those thoughts that say to themselves, it is possible for me to make this change in my life. And so for us, we really see ourselves as just one part of, when I say us, kind of Australians,
Right.
being one part of the equation in the solution to ending hunger. And the other part of the equation are people who are actually living in hunger, and we see that it requires both sides to solve that problem. But it really does lie in us showing our leadership and bringing our resources to the problem, and our partners, and we do refer to them as our partners who live in Malawi, for example, bringing their leadership and their resources, and what our resources look like look different to their resources, but equally as valuable in the solution. And so for us, that is our money, which is our leadership, and our money is us, and where we direct our money kind of shows what we believe in and what we want and what our desires are. And so if our desire is to end hunger, then that's something that we can put our money towards. And so
But what does that actually look like? So you're not buying food for them?
We're not buying food
So
for
what are
them.
you doing?
So for example, in Africa, in Malawi, where it was just recently, the kind of way that partnership manifests there is that we work within a community that wants to end hunger. So we have an office in Malawi that works with a number of communities there, and we spend like 2 years in a community going through this process with them of what would your village look like without hunger, and people really trying to create this vision of what would that look like, which is a really difficult thing to come up with when you don't know any different, and anything else seems impossible. So after we kind of go through this process, which you can imagine even for yourself, trying to change your own mindset or your own habits or whatever, it's difficult. One of the things that we do in Africa is helping to create infrastructure, because that's something that's really lacking. So often, something like a hospital is kilometres and kilometres away, and if you're in labour and you have to walk sort of 30 kilometres to get to a hospital, it's not a good situation to be in. So one of the things that we do is ask our partners to help us build some infrastructure that's close to their area. And so our resources that we can give to that is our money, but we also ask for them to go, hand in hand with us on that project. So we're not coming in and just building the hospital and away we go. They actually make the bricks. So one community might create like 800,000 bricks or something, I think it is, for the entire complex. And so these are people who are living, hand to mouth, day to day, not really knowing where the next meal is coming from. They might have malaria, they might be pregnant, they might be malnourished, but actually they're moulding these bricks with their hands, because that's the resources that they've got. They've got the mud, they know how to make the bricks, so that's their contribution to the project. And our contribution is the money that to pay for the labour, for example, to facilitate a partnership with local government to staff the hospital and things like that. So that's kind of where the two sides of the equation come into play, and we really see them as they're the ones who are going to end their own hunger.
Yeah.
But it's going to require us to do something about it. And we've got 10 principles at the Hunger Project. Number one is human dignity, because that is the basis of everything that we do. But another one that I really like is interconnectedness. And so for us, that is when I go to this village in Malawi, that anyone that I meet there, I am them and they are me. So when I'm investing in them,
that's pretty yoga, isn't it?
It's pretty yoga, and I really like that, because it makes sense to me, and it means that when I'm investing in them, I'm also investing in myself, and I'm investing in a world that I want to live in.
Yeah, collectively empowered world. So I just want to jump back to you for a moment. You work Sadie, how can yoga empower people to kind of step in to care for themselves with mental health?
Well, from my personal experience, yoga was really the only place where I was given the choice to do what I wanted to do, and there's a lot of kind of, you know, there's always other people telling you what to do. It doesn't matter whether you're well or unwell. But I think when you're maybe in a situation where you don't feel sure of yourself, that, you know, having those other people's voices in your mind saying do this is not really an easy situation. And what is much more empowering is to have a space where your own voice can come up and you can really figure out what it is that you want. So obviously a yoga practice does that, and this idea of like setting an intention, like what do you want? What is it that you're going to create? Because actually that's what we're doing every moment, like, you know, creating the next one. So how are we going to use it instead of maybe just sitting with things the way they are and being like, meh, it's okay. So in more kind of specific terms, it's really like, well, you know, for many of us it might seem obvious. Listen to your breathing. Is it fast? Do you need to calm down? Do you sound like you've just ran up a, you know, 20 flights of stairs? And then if that's the case, what sort of practice do you need? And obviously these things don't come like instantly. A bit of exposure to teachers and other yoga people can help. But ultimately it's you that makes the decision. Like, it's not, when you go to your yoga class, sure, there's a teacher teaching you, but it's not them making you do what you do. Like, you have some decision at some point, and I think that's what has to really be valued, like giving people their voices in a situation where they really don't feel like they can hear their own voice. So, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. and Ari, so you founded Queer and Trans Yoga. So can you just speak to a little bit like what your motivation was, or what's the change that you really want to see in the world, and why have you chosen kind of yoga to help you create that?
Sure, I'm really love hearing from everyone and resonating strongly with something from that each person is saying about that. I co-founded the Queer and Trans Yoga with Sandy King, who's also a Jivamukti instructor, and she's fantastic if you get the chance to study with her. I worked together with Sandy King, who's also a Jivamukti instructor, to create Queer and Trans Yoga a while back. And our motivation was, which we sort of arrived at just coincidentally at the same time, was very similar, which was to try to create a space, a yoga space that was at least conceptually demarcated as safe for people who identify into lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and questioning orientations and other related categories. And I think sometimes people don't always realize why that might be helpful or how it can contribute to a kind of community thing in a larger scale. The way I see it, it's not actually just a parochial a service that benefits only a narrow community. Actually, it benefits everyone. And one of the reasons I see it that way is that, well, for one thing, if somebody's feeling healthy and integrated in themselves, then they'll also make a happier member of society. But also, sort of like what Emma was saying about ahimsa, that, and I think maybe perhaps especially for this group in particular, which is sort of self-selecting, as we're all people who want to give back in some way to community, whatever that community may be, that we can sometimes easily forget that in the circle of generosity, we also have to include ourselves. It's really important not to have your generosity or your compassion be the kind where everyone gets something but you, or where you're kind of willfully excluded, or you feel that self-sacrifice is a part of the gift, because that doesn't ever work in the end. And I think for people who are who identify into those communities that I mentioned, there's also there's often a lot of pressure externally to work against yourself, to take away from yourself, to not acknowledge your own stability, and to be a little bit at war. So yoga is a fantastic way of building your own sense of stability, and then from there allowing you to understand that even as you're an activist in the world and you want to give to other gay and lesbian people, that you also have to remember that you are one of these people, one of that community that you want to serve, and that community circle expands larger and larger. So I think that's one of the things, one of the reasons our classes are by donation. happen every Wednesday night, and anyone's welcome. You don't have to identify into those groups, just have to be an ally. And but people find also, I think, and this is something else that folks don't always realize unless they're in that position, is that sometimes you can be in a yoga class and feel really uncomfortable. Like, am I the only person in here who doesn't have the usual configuration of bits? Or and am I the only person in here who's not identifying with this language of male and female? Or kind of assumptions about what our priorities are, and can feel very isolating. So it's really nice sometimes to have a class situation where you don't actually have to think about that at all, or it's not one of the things, one of the chitta vritti that you have to get rid of. It's already gone. So that's kind of a nice thing. And I think, yeah, so that's something, but what I'm saying is probably obviously applies to so many communities. It's not just LGBTIQ, it's any group or any person, individual who feels a need to, who feels external pressure to ignore their core. So that's one of the reasons we put that group together. And so it kind of took a little while to get rolling when it started to get rolling, and now people come regularly, and we have a core group of fantastic teachers, some of whom are here, but I didn't seek permission for us to identify them. Once we got rolling, we realized we also know it's all by donation, and we finally had paid off the web server, and Sandy and I had contributed our own funds to get things rolling. We finally had paid everything off. Now we donate any proceeds to a group called Sister Girls and Brother Boys. It's an indigenous transgender community grassroots organization that distributes information to communities in remote areas. So for example, one project they're working on is putting information on USB sticks and sending it out, to the Northern Territories and elsewhere where it's harder to get that kind of information. And that's just one of the things.
Awesome. So we have a little bit of time for questions now. So if you got anything brewing that you'd like to know from any of these lovely folk, or even a comment, something that you heard that sparked something for you that you'd like to share publicly.
I was just talking about a hunger project. With the hunger project, where that's targeted at? Did you say it was specifically
In what areas?
Yeah.
So we work in Africa, in 8 countries in Africa, in India, Bangladesh, and Latin America. Yeah. So we have, Australia, we're a fundraising office in Australia, but we have different strategies that we use in each of those different areas, recognising that poverty in Africa looks very different from poverty in India, for example. And our strategy in India taps into something really cool that they've already got that exists there, which is that they have a quota of women that have to be elected to local government positions. And so what kind of was happening was that women were getting elected, but they were just kind of there. And they didn't know what to do. They were illiterate. They'd never had any, use for understanding the political system before, because it didn't mean anything to them. So what we do is work with those women who are already in elected positions of power, and give them the opportunity to identify things in their community that they would like to change, which might be something to do with education or healthcare, for example. And then give them skills like public speaking skills and negotiation skills, as well as helping, maybe to read and write, or whatever it is that they need to be able to use their positions of power, to develop their community in the way that they want to. So that's what we do, for example, in India.
Fundraising, how are you raising the funds for that?
So we have a very committed investor community in Australia. Pardon? Some corporates, but also lots of individuals, some of whom are here as well tonight supporting us. And we do, it's another kind of partnership thing that we do as well, going back to, so we partner with people living in these villages where we work, but we refer to people that give us money as investors, because we really see that it's people are really investing in this as a partnership. Yeah. So and I really feel like that it makes a difference when someone is referred to as an investor. Our investors really feel like they're part of the equation as well, and it's
Contribution and a donation.
Yeah, it goes back to something else we were talking about before. There's actually a lot of yogic principles that fit in nicely with the Hunger Project, and one of them is we talk about conscious investing, so giving your money consciously. And for example, I was just talking to one of our investors this week, and she gives us money on a monthly basis, but instead of just setting up like a direct debit, she actually goes in and transfers the money online every month, because she likes the process of every month reminding herself that I am giving this money to the Hunger Project. And that's just, not everyone does that, but for her that really works, because it reminds her every month that this is how I'm choosing to give my money.
It's kind of ritualizing the process of giving, which could be a kind of a spiritual practice as well, like a sadhana or something. Yeah,
keeping that present.
David, you had a question?
Yeah, I think, Katie, you started off with the idea of sort of right thoughts, right words, right actions, and a lot of the comments have been really valuable around. You had any insights or your own experiences and journeys around getting congruence between all three of those layers, between the thoughts, the words, and the actions? Because my experience is the congruence really counts for a lot.
I went to see Peter Singer speaking recently. Does anyone know Peter Singer? He wrote Animal Liberation a long time ago, I think back in the 70s or the 80s, and he's a philosopher, he's an academic, so he's a university professor, but he travels the world basically talking about the kinds of things that we're talking about this evening, but to a very academic type of audience. And he wrote a book a few years ago now called The Life You Can Change. Has anyone read that book? It's really, The Life You Can Change. It's a really incredible book. So the premise is, and he's coming from a very scholarly, very academic place, so there's nothing airy-fairy about him. He's not remotely hippie-ish in any way, although he might sound like it when I tell you what his idea is. But the premise of his book is that basically, so simple, the amount of money that we spend in Western sort of civilized, so-called civilized culture on soft drinks and water is enough to eradicate world hunger. Now, he's done a lot of statistics on this. It's not just some sort of idea that he's pulled out of the sky. And basically what he's saying is, but he particularly talks about bottled water. He talks about how many bottles of water most people buy in a week, in a year, etc., and how bad that is for the environment, although that's a complete sort of aside for him. But then the idea that if we put all of that money into donation or investment into countries that needed it and people that needed it, that actually that would completely transform world economies. It just blew my mind. So I guess what I want to say is, in answer to your question, sometimes it's really small things. We think that the problems in the world are totally insurmountable and that we're totally insignificant and that there's nothing that we can do. Or if we can do something, it has to be something huge and radical. And often it's just really, really small things, like stop buying bottled water and start making a regular donation to a charity of your choice for the same amount of money that you spent, or coffee, take out coffee. That could make a radical difference. My teacher, I guess I can't end without saying that my teacher, Sharon Gannon, says, and she's a really strong animal rights activist and very pro-vegetarian diet, and so she would say that we don't have many choices about how we can help the world, and sometimes it can be really challenging, but what we do every single day, multiple times, is eat, and we have a choice every time we eat not to eat another living or being that was once living. So again, that's very empowering as an idea, that we just make these choices, multiple times a day, that we could change, that would have a very direct impact.
And I'll just add as well, I think it's really kind of nice to simplify and just go, okay, if there's one thing that I really believe, I really believe in looking after the environment, I really don't believe in plastic water bottles or plastic bags, I'm going to make a choice as a consumer to avoid just that. Because I think sometimes when you sort of like decide to open your heart and really kind of feel for all the suffering on the planet, it can be completely overwhelming and going, like, what am I going to do? And then you end up kind of like just feeling overwhelmed. So it is this simple, clear things that go from thought to action to, like I'm going to take my keep cup with me, and I'm not going to throw away paper coffee cups.
So much of that stuff is about cultivating habit too, and mindfulness, because we don't. It starts out being hard. Like in the beginning, it might be difficult to be vegetarian, or it might be difficult to be vegan, or it might be difficult to carry a keep cup, and then it just becomes second nature. Like it just becomes so habitual that it's just what you do and who you are. And so if we can be really conscious about what those habits are, as opposed to unconscious. I see it. I've got young children. I really see it in their generation. Like my kids are learning in school now about being environmentally aware, and they're often more environmentally aware than I am. Like, and you know, I consider myself to be quite a conscious parent, but they're really, really thinking about, okay, I've got this piece of litter, where does it go? Like, whereas still in my generation and older generations, we're kind of like, oh, it's litter, it goes in the bin. So there is a shift happening, I think.
And what's really cool, oh sorry, can I just say one more thing on
and
that?
then we'll take,
What's really cool about that is because then you start bringing things in, those things become habits, and then that opens you up to take on another little thing that you might want to change in your life, and then when that becomes habit, you can choose another thing, so it's kind of has that roll-on effect, which I like.
Sarah, and then
I'm just curious, we have a lot of, we hear a lot in yogic circles about the idea of intention, but a lot of the world's most damaging projects and initiatives have been done with the best of intentions. So I'm wondering if any of you would speak to unconscious activism and what that might look like in a yogic context, or in your own lives, or any other sense of what unconscious activism might be like, and the effects of that.
I mean, I can certainly think of some times I've been to a protest where I've gone, with the intention of, yes, I'm part of a movement. I'm, with all these people, and we're, working to raise awareness around climate change, or we want to influence the government around a particular situation or something like that. And there's been sometimes the rabble rousers in the crowd, the people that might kind of grab a hold of the megaphone and then start going off on a big rant and yelling at people in the street that actually we want them, they're the people that we want to kind of influence and bring into this movement, not sort of shout them down and isolate them and push them away. And I've definitely been in situations where I've been part of a protest and felt the impact of that, and felt really quite disempowered, almost like I didn't really want to be part of it anymore, but then going, no, sometimes there are people that sort of can sort of knock you off, feel like you want to leave the movement, but it's being there is more important than being impacted by some behaviours that might be a little bit self-indulgent or not really conscious or thought out. So stick with it.
So isn't it just about the balance, the right balance of people when you have the people you have in the movement? So you're going to have people in the leadership that will be creating that culture of peace, but you're going to have that powerful underlying, let's go, do it type of energy to achieve something.
So I think what I've noticed in the campaign to protect the Laird State Forest from the Maules Creek coal mine, big open cut coal mine in the middle of this endangered woodland, there's been a lot of movement towards really trying to train people up in non-violent direct action. There's been a lot of trainings happening sort of up the Central Coast and also at the blockade camp. There's events that happen at the blockade nearly once a month, where there's a series of 3-day workshops that happen, so people can really get into and start to explore their boundaries around what non-violence means to them. So I think there's a real growing movement at the moment where a lot more people are getting trained in non-violent direct action, and that really should be the underlying principle behind any sort of protest, I believe. And it's a commitment that the Wilderness Society has, Greenpeace, a lot of the progressive organisations are committed to non-violent direct action or peaceful protest. So I think it's really, it is really the duty of the leaders of the movement to be, keeping an eye out for situations that might arise and might cause a little bit of, potential damage to the movement, and particularly in the eye of the media. I mean, that's something that the last thing you want in any kind of protest is, for the issue to be sidelined because the conflict and violence erupted, and it completely throws the intention and the purpose of why people were there completely off course. So I do think leaders of protest organisers, the people that, people that gear people, rally people up at the start of protests, really do have that responsibility to really try and maintain that ethic so that it's known, and that's what we're committed to.
And you can still have like a fierce energy that is anger transformed into love, that you're acting out of compassion for wanting to care for a forest or care for people. And there is definitely kind of a clunky process as a human being, I think, to kind of transform, like, if your action is motivated because of anger, like you're furious about something, to go through a process, maybe through using breath work or meditation, where you can start to transform that energy in your body into something that is motivated by love, and that love can be fierce.
Yeah. And also, I think, and it goes back to the idea of intention as well, that we shouldn't get too stuck in this idea of us and them. Like, it's really easy for that to happen. And actually, if you have a fundamental belief, like if your foundation belief is that human beings are good and they want to do the right thing, which is really part of the teachings of yoga, and it's certainly what I believe, then really all we're trying to do is open everyone up to that inner spark of goodness and beauty and joy. And them out there that we're kind of fighting just haven't, like the Buddha had this beautiful expression. He said they have but little dust over their eyelids. And it's almost like if we can just blow away that dust, then the eyes will open. It's not a huge process that needs to happen. It's actually quite simple. It's just the critical mass, we need to kind of keep chipping away at it, and it will happen. And I love that image. I kind of keep that image in mind sometimes when I feel like it's a battle that will never be won, that it isn't a battle, and that there isn't really anything to win, and that all we need to do is open our own eyes and blow away the dust.
That's beautiful. I think we'll finish on that note. So thank you all to our panellists.